Black homeless veteran denied justice. Darius Williams sits quietly as privileged teens pour drinks over his head, kick him, spit on him. He covers his face, doesn't fight back, just whispers, "Please, just leave me alone." The crowd of onlookers either films or walks away. One teenager shouts, "This is what you get for being a loser." As Darius wipes his face with trembling hands, the camera catches something, a small, faded tattoo on his wrist that reads, "De Oppresso Liber." The teens have no idea what they just recorded. Have you ever witnessed something like this and wondered what you would do? The security cameras at Centennial Olympic Park captured everything. Every cruel laugh, every drop of soda, every moment that would change lives forever. August heat pressed down on downtown Atlanta as Darius Williams sat quietly on his usual bench. At 47, he learned to make himself invisible. Head down, hands folded, bothering no one. Just try to survive another day on the streets. That's when they spotted him. 5 teenagers with expensive phones and designer clothes. Their leader, a blonde girl with perfectly manicured nails, pointed at Darius and grinned. This is going to be epic content. They formed a circle around him. Phones raised. Recording. "Hey, homeless guy," one of them shouted. "We've got money for you." Darius looked up hopefully. Maybe someone finally wanted to help. Instead, they poured energy drinks over his head. The sticky liquid soaked through his worn jacket, dripping onto the concrete. The smell mixed with the summer heat, creating a nauseating sweetness that clung to everything. "Dance for us," another teenager yelled, kicking at his legs. Darius raised his hands defensively. "Please, just leave me alone." But they didn't stop. More kicks, spit landing on his face. Cruel laughter echoing off the buildings as passers-by either pulled out their own phones to record or hurried past, pretending not to see. The blonde girl stepped closer, her voice dripping with disgust. "This is what you get for being a complete loser. Maybe if you weren't so pathetic, you'd have a real life." Darius covered his face with trembling hands, his body curled in a protective position. He didn't fight back, didn't even raise his voice. Just endured it with a quiet dignity that the cameras couldn't quite capture. As the teenagers finally got bored and walked away, still filming and laughing, something caught the light. On Darius's wrist, barely visible beneath his soaked sleeve, was a small, faded tattoo. 2 words in Latin, "De Oppresso Liber." The kids were too busy uploading their prank to social media to notice. The crowd dispersed, already moving on with their lives. But those cameras kept rolling, preserving every detail of what would become the most important footage in Atlanta's legal history. Because those teenagers had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had no idea who they were messing with. Have you ever witnessed something like this and wondered what you would do? Would you have stepped in, or would you have walked away like everyone else? District Attorney Tristan Maxwell straightened his electric lime green tie and smiled at his reflection. At 39, he'd built his entire career on knowing which cases would make headlines and which ones would disappear quietly into the system. The assault footage from Centennial Park sat on his desk, barely watched. His assistant had flagged it as routine homeless incident, and Maxwell saw no reason to dig deeper. Election season was approaching, and he needed victories that would play well with voters. "Insufficient evidence," he announced to his staff, barely glancing at the video. "Resource allocation priorities. We can't waste taxpayer money on every vagrant who gets into trouble." His marble office walls displayed a carefully curated collection of campaign photos. Maxwell shaking hands with governors. Maxwell cutting ribbons. Maxwell promising justice for the right kind of victims. The teenagers' parents had already made their calls. Expensive lawyers were hired within hours. Donations to Maxwell's campaign fund mysteriously increased overnight. These kids made a mistake, Maxwell told Detective Maria Santos when she brought him the case file. But let's not ruin promising futures over one bad decision. Santos stared at the evidence folder in her hands. The video was crystal clear. The assault was undeniable. Multiple witnesses. But she'd seen this dance before. "Sir, the victim was a homeless man with a history of mental health issues," Maxwell interrupted. Credibility problems. Defense would tear him apart. Not worth the court costs. Santos nodded reluctantly and filed the case away. She'd been a detective for 12 years, long enough to know when a fight was already lost. But something about this one bothered her. The way the victim had protected himself. The discipline in his movements. The complete lack of retaliation despite being outnumbered. Professional soldiers move like that, not random homeless people. Meanwhile, across town, the teenagers celebrated their viral video. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. Most laughed along with their prank. But buried in those comments were a few that would have made Maxwell nervous if he'd bothered to read them. Veterans recognizing something in the victim's posture. Military families noting the controlled way he'd handled the attack. Do you know someone in power who's forgotten what justice really means? Someone who picks and chooses which victims deserve protection. Cameron Brooks had never planned to become the family conscience. At 26, he preferred the quiet corners of Brooks & Associates, the prestigious law firm his grandfather had built defending civil rights cases in the 1960s. While his colleagues chased high-profile clients and media attention, Cameron worked behind the scenes. Harvard law degree gathering dust while he helped single mothers fight eviction notices and elderly people navigate Medicare fraud. But something about the homeless assault case wouldn't leave him alone. He'd seen the video on social media like everyone else. I watched those teenagers attack a defenseless man while the world recorded and laughed. Most people shared it for shock value, then forgot about it by dinner time. Cameron couldn't forget. There was something about the victim's bearing. Even while being humiliated, the man maintained a certain posture. Protective, yes, but controlled. Disciplined, like someone trained to handle chaos. Cameron had spent 2 years at West Point before transferring to Harvard. He knew military bearing when he saw it. Run a background check, he told his private investigator, sliding a photo across the desk. Darius Williams, age 47, currently homeless. But I want everything. Sir, if he's homeless, there might not be much to. Trust me on this one. Cameron spent the next 3 nights in his office, surrounded by case files and legal precedents. His family had always taken the hard cases. His grandfather had defended freedom riders. His father had fought housing discrimination in the 1980s. Now it was his turn. The investigator called on Thursday morning. You're going to want to sit down for this. Cameron was already sitting, but he gripped his chair arms anyway. Darius Williams, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army Special Forces. Silver Star recipient. Purple Heart. Bronze Star with Valor. 4 tours in Afghanistan leading high-risk rescue operations. The room went silent except for the sound of Cameron's heartbeat thundering in his ears. Sir, are you still there? Keep going. Gets better. Or worse, depending on how you look at it. In 2019, he led a rescue mission that saved 4 American soldiers from Taliban captivity. One of those soldiers was Sergeant First Class Michael Maxwell. Cameron's blood ran cold. Maxwell, brother of District Attorney Tristan Maxwell, same guy who just dismissed the assault case. Cameron hung up and stared out his office window at the Atlanta skyline. A decorated war hero sleeping on park benches. The DA who owed his brother's life to that hero refusing to seek justice. This wasn't just about one assault anymore. Have you ever felt like you were meant to help someone, even when you didn't know why? The full military file arrived at Cameron's office in a sealed envelope marked confidential. His hands shook as he broke the wax seal and spread the documents across his mahogany desk. Lieutenant Colonel Darius Williams stared back at him from an official Army photograph. Dress uniform pristine, chest decorated with ribbons representing years of distinguished service. The contrast with the homeless man from the assault video was heartbreaking. But it was the mission reports that made Cameron's blood boil. October 15, 2019. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. 4 American soldiers captured during a reconnaissance mission went wrong. Intelligence suggested they would be executed within 48 hours. Darius had volunteered to lead the rescue operation. Deep into Taliban-controlled territory. Minimal backup. Maximum risk. The mission succeeded. All 4 soldiers were brought home alive. But the extraction had cost Darius everything. The IED explosion that covered their retreat left him with traumatic brain injury and severe PTSD. Medical records showed months of treatment, followed by a VA system that failed him at every turn. Paperwork lost. Benefits delayed. Mental health appointments canceled due to budget constraints. His marriage crumbled under the weight of untreated trauma. Flashbacks and anxiety attacks made employment impossible. When a clerical error delayed his disability payments, Darius lost his apartment. The hero who had saved Michael Maxwell ended up sleeping on the streets of Atlanta. Cameron pulled up the DA's case files on his computer. What he found made him physically sick. Over the past 18 months, Tristan Maxwell had dismissed or plea bargained down 37 cases involving black victims. Similar cases with white victims, prosecuted aggressively, with Maxwell personally appearing in court to deliver passionate speeches about justice. The pattern was undeniable. The racism was systematic. But this case was personal. Cameron picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized from the military records. Sergeant Maxwell, this is Cameron Brooks, attorney at law. I need to tell you something about the man who saved your life. The conversation lasted 2 hours. By the end, Michael Maxwell was crying. I've been trying to find him for years, Michael whispered. To thank him. To tell him what his sacrifice meant. And you're telling me he's homeless? Then my brother threw his case away. Your brother owes his family to Darius Williams. And instead of gratitude, he offered betrayal. Cameron hung up and walked to his office window. The Atlanta skyline stretched before him, gleaming towers built on foundations of old injustices. Some things never changed, but some things could. He pulled out his grandfather's silver tie clip, the one worn during the Nuremberg trials. Tomorrow, he would wear his family's tradition into battle. Tristan Maxwell thought he could bury inconvenient truths beneath political ambition. He was about to learn that some battles can't be won with campaign donations and colored ties. What would you do if you discovered the homeless person everyone ignored was actually a war hero who had saved lives? Cameron Brooks methodically arranged the evidence across his conference table like a general planning a decisive battle. Military records, medical files, witness statements, and video footage formed a devastating arsenal of truth. He had 48 hours before the scheduled hearing. The first call went to the Pentagon. I need classified mission reports declassified for court proceedings. National security implications. 3 hours later, the files arrived via secure courier. The second call went directly to Michael Maxwell. I can't believe this is happening. Michael's voice cracked through the phone. Darius saved my life. He carried me out of that compound while bullets were flying. I owe him everything. Will you testify? I'll do whatever it takes. My brother needs to know what he's done. Cameron's third call was to his tailor. I need grandfather's sapphire blue suit pressed and ready. The one from the Nuremberg trials. The special occasion suit, sir? Very special. That evening, Cameron visited Darius at the downtown shelter. The war hero sat quietly in the corner, still bearing the dignity that had caught Cameron's attention in the first place. Tomorrow, the world will know who you really are, Cameron said gently. Darius looked up with eyes that had seen too much. I stopped caring about recognition a long time ago. This isn't about recognition. It's about justice and respect and showing people that heroes don't always look like what they expect. They sat in comfortable silence, two men from different worlds united by a shared sense of duty. Cameron drove home through the city he'd grown up in, past the courthouse where his grandfather had fought for civil rights, past the law school where his father had studied, past the park where Darius had been humiliated. Tomorrow, all of it would collide in a single moment of truth. He parked in his driveway and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, in bases around the world, soldiers were risking their lives for strangers. And back home, those same soldiers were being forgotten, dismissed, abandoned. Not this time. Have you ever prepared for a moment that would change everything? The courthouse buzzed with routine morning energy. Reporters expected another quick hearing, maybe a soundbite for the evening news. Defense attorneys shuffled papers with bored efficiency. Even the bailiff seemed half asleep. Tristan Maxwell strutted through the doors wearing his signature electric lime green tie, already composing his next campaign speech in his head. The assault case was supposed to be dismissed in 10 minutes, leaving him free to focus on more important matters. He had no idea his political career had exactly 9 minutes left to live. Cameron Brooks entered wearing his grandfather's perfectly pressed sapphire blue suit, the silver tie clip catching the courtroom lights. He carried a single leather briefcase that seemed to weigh more than it should. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams. The packed courtroom settled into expectant silence as Cameron approached the bench. His voice carried the measured authority of 3 generations of legal tradition. Your Honor, before this case is dismissed, I believe the court should know exactly who was assaulted in Centennial Park. Maxwell shifted uncomfortably. This was supposed to be a formality. Cameron opened his briefcase and withdrew a photograph. This is not just any homeless veteran. The courtroom gasped as he held up an official military portrait. Lieutenant Colonel Darius Williams in full dress uniform, his chest adorned with ribbons representing years of distinguished service. This is Lieutenant Colonel Darius Williams, United States Army Special Forces. Silver Star recipient. Purple Heart. Bronze Star with Valor. The contrast between the military photograph and the recent assault footage was stark and heartbreaking. Several spectators began crying. For 4 tours of duty, Lieutenant Colonel Williams led some of the most dangerous rescue missions in Afghanistan. He personally saved the lives of dozens of American soldiers. Maxwell's face had gone white, but the real shock was yet to come. Cameron produced another set of documents. On October 15, 2019, Lieutenant Colonel Williams led a rescue operation deep into Taliban-controlled territory. 4 American soldiers had been captured and were scheduled for execution. Video footage began playing on the courtroom screens. Darius Williams in combat gear, leading his team through enemy fire, carrying wounded soldiers to safety. The mission was a complete success. All 4 soldiers were brought home alive. Cameron's voice rose with emotion. Among those soldiers was Sergeant First Class Michael Maxwell. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Spectators shouted questions. Camera flashes lit up the room like lightning. Maxwell sat frozen, his carefully constructed political facade crumbling in real time. That's right, Cameron continued over the noise. Lieutenant Colonel Williams personally saved the life of District Attorney Maxwell's own brother. The same man he dismissed as just another homeless troublemaker is the reason his family still has a son. The gallery exploded into complete pandemonium. Even the judge was visibly shaken. Cameron wasn't finished. He presented medical records showing Darius's combat injuries, his PTSD diagnosis, the VA system failures that had led to his homelessness. This decorated war hero, who risked everything to save American lives, was abandoned by the very system he served. And when he needed justice most, the brother of the man he saved threw him away like garbage. Maxwell tried to speak, but no words came. His electric lime green tie suddenly looked ridiculous against his pale, sweating face. Mr. Maxwell built his career promising justice for victims. But when it came time to protect the man who saved his brother's life, he chose politics over principle. The courtroom had become a hurricane of outrage, disbelief, and devastating truth. How do you think Maxwell felt when he realized his mistake? The courtroom footage went viral within the hour. Hashtag Justice for Darius exploded across social media platforms as millions of Americans watched a district attorney's career implode in real time. Veterans organizations nationwide demanded Maxwell's immediate resignation. Civil rights groups called for investigations into his prosecutorial record. Even his own staff began distancing themselves from the scandal. But the most devastating blow came from his own family. Michael Maxwell held a press conference that afternoon, his army dress uniform pressed and pristine, his voice shaking with emotion. Lieutenant Colonel Darius Williams saved my life. He carried me out of that Taliban compound while enemy fire was hitting all around us. I owe him everything. Tears streamed down his face as he continued. For years, I've been trying to find him, to thank him, to tell him what his sacrifice meant to me and my family. The cameras captured every word as Michael's voice broke completely. Instead, I discovered that my own brother threw him away, dismissed his case, ignored his pain. That's not the family I was raised in. That's not the justice my country stands for. The reunion between Darius and Michael later that day became the most shared video of the year. Two soldiers, one who had saved and one who had been saved, embracing while the country watched and wept. Tristan Maxwell's resignation came at 6 p.m., delivered via a brief statement that blamed misunderstandings and incomplete information. Nobody believed him. The teenagers who had assaulted Darius were finally charged and convicted. The judge sentenced them to community service with veterans organizations and mandatory education about PTSD and homelessness. Maybe, the judge said during sentencing, you'll learn what real strength looks like. Detective Maria Santos came forward with evidence of Maxwell's systematic discrimination. 37 cases involving black victims have been dismissed or plea bargained down, while similar cases with white victims were prosecuted aggressively. The state attorney general announced a full investigation into prosecutorial misconduct. Maxwell's political career was over, but the damage he had caused would take years to repair. Within a week, a GoFundMe campaign for Darius raised over $2 million. The VA expedited his benefits processing. Mental health organizations offered free treatment. But perhaps the most important change was in the conversation itself. Across America, people began asking harder questions about how veterans were treated, how justice was administered, and how easily society could overlook its greatest heroes. The assault in Centennial Park had lasted less than 10 minutes. The consequences would last a lifetime. Do you think the punishment fit the crime? 6 months later, Darius Williams walked through Centennial Park again. But this time, children playing nearby looked up and waved. Their parents had told them about the war hero who had saved American soldiers. The bench where he'd been assaulted now bore a small plaque, in honor of all veterans who serve in silence. Darius smiled and continued walking. He had an appointment with his therapist in an hour, followed by lunch with Michael Maxwell. The two men had become close friends, their shared military experience creating a bond that transcended the circumstances of their reunion. Cameron Brooks had returned to his quiet practice, but now focused exclusively on veterans' rights and prosecutorial reform. The phone calls never stopped coming. Lawyers from across the country wanted to learn his strategies. Veterans organizations sought his guidance. He never wanted the spotlight, but sometimes the spotlight found you anyway. The case had sparked a national conversation about veteran care and systemic racism in the justice system. New protocols were implemented for handling veteran cases. The VA received additional funding for mental health services. Prosecutorial oversight committees were established in 12 states. Tristan Maxwell had disappeared from public life entirely. Some said he'd moved to a small town in Montana. Others claimed he was working as a paralegal somewhere in the Midwest. Nobody seemed to care enough to find out for sure. The teenagers from the assault had completed their community service. Several had written letters of apology to Darius. One had even changed his college major to social work, inspired by the veterans he'd met during his service hours. Detective Maria Santos had been promoted to lieutenant and put in charge of a new task force investigating prosecutorial misconduct. Her first case involved a pattern of discrimination against immigrant victims. As Darius reached the edge of the park, he paused and looked back. The city continued its daily rhythm, but something fundamental had changed. Sometimes it took just one person willing to fight for the truth to shift the entire conversation. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who've sacrificed the most. And sometimes justice arrives precisely when it's needed most. What would you have done in Cameron's place? Do you think Maxwell deserved a second chance? Should we judge people by their worst moments or remember them for their best?